Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Pierce County Council's Monday study session. It is Monday, October 30th, 2023. The time is 11:01 a.m. All members are present except for Councilmember Morell, who is excused. Unless Mr. Weinsbury tells me he sees him in the Zoom room.
He's here today,
So we expect him shortly. Item 2 is review of the October 31, 2023 Halloween council meeting agenda. Ms. Long.
Thank you. Here is your spooky agenda for tomorrow. It is amended. We'll start with your consent agenda. There's one item for scheduling, and that's our 2023-158. This is setting the date of an evening District 4 council meeting, and that will be, you'll be setting the final on that for November 7th. There are 3 resolutions for final action. First is our 2023-153. This is confirming the reappointment of 2 existing members to the Mid-County Land Use Advisory Commission. Our 2023-156 is confirming the reappointment of 2 existing members to the Parkland-Spanaway Midland Land Use Advisory Commission. And our 2023-157 is confirming the appointment of 3 new members to the Accessible Communities Advisory Committee. Moving now to section 7, you have one proclamation tomorrow, and that's designating the month of November as Native American and Alaskan Native Heritage Month in Pierce County. And that one was requested by both council members Herrera and Campbell. If you want to, Councilmember Herrera will. Okay. Thank you. Moving to section 8 ordinances, you have 4 items here. The first is 2023-56. This is declaring certain county-owned real property as surplus. This is the Old Settlers Cemetery property. And this received a due pass at rules on October 9th. Next is 2023-62. This is amending chapter 2106 of the code entitled Purchasing. This was forwarded without recommendation at rules on October 9th. There is one amendment, and our chief of staff will discuss this and the next 2 shortly. Next proposal is 2023-67. This is adopting a new chapter 2111 of the code entitled Notice of Funding Availability Process. This was forwarded from the rules and operations on October 23rd with a due pass recommendation. And finally, you have 2023-68. This is relating to county funds and amending the code. This is related to the creation of a special revenue fund, the Community Needs Fund, although this may change it to a program. This received a due pass recommendation at rules on October 23rd. And there is one amendment to this as well, and that is your agenda for tomorrow's meeting.
Thank you. For the record, Councilmember Morell is present. We're going to get into amendments. I just want to remind members we have an 11:30 start with our legislative delegation. So the intention is to recess this meeting shortly before 11:30 to move into the 11:30 and come back to this meeting. So are there questions for Ms. Long before we get into amendments related to the procurement bills? Not seeing any. Ms. Murray.
Thank you. Good morning, Julie Murray, Chief of Staff. I'm going to discuss some amendments that I've been working on with Councilmember Morell to be offered tomorrow. I don't have the exact language yet because we're still working on some revisions that came as early as this morning, but I wanted to at least describe to them today, and we can go into them in more detail tomorrow as well. So the first is 2023-62, which is the county's general purchasing procurement chapter. And as members may or may not remember, the original version of this ordinance would have set a higher dollar limit amount for the procurement of services to $50,000, being able to contract a vendor directly. $50,000 to $150,000, you'd be required to contact 3 vendors, and if for a funding that was over $150,000, you would advertise a request for proposal. The amendment being offered would lower those amounts to $25,000 to do a direct vendor contract. Between $25,000 and $49.99, you would do 3 vendors for proposals, and if the amount was over $50,000, you would advertise an RFP. In addition, some of the references to state law are updated. And then we are also deleting the definition of professional services as requested by the executive because it's not necessary due to state law references. So that's really the content of the changes there. The meat of the matter is lowering those procurement limits from what was originally proposed. Is there any, I'm available for any questions, or do you like to do it at the end?
Let's ask for questions on the bills independently. I think all members see they somewhat interact with each other, but let's take them one at a time, I think. Vice Chair Campbell.
It's really just a procedural thing. I appreciate the chart here that kind of shows, where it's at, where it's going. Could we come back and do a column of what has been the practice for the last 20 years prior to the rule change by the executive?
That's what I attempted to do with the current code law, which is the very first. So that's why you see currently for procurement of services, the limit would be at $5,000 for a direct vendor. I guess the difference here would be with respect to the direct appropriations, and that's sort of, I guess, not to any individual amendment, but to sort of the context of where we are today, which is.
Right, what was common practice for the last 20 years is a little different than what after the rule change by the executive.
Okay.
And so I just want to be able to context that against it. We can talk offline, but things all of a sudden changed a month ago. And so I want to be able to compare what it was before the rule change.
What it's been for 20 years.
Right.
Right.
What it's been, what you have heard here under the current is with the executive's rule change. And then what's proposed. So.
So is it?
Don't need it right away,
Okay.
but would like it.
Yeah, some of that is referenced in the staff report that came in as sort of like the recent sort of legal ruling that they've taken, but we'll
connect
work on
offline.
it.
Before we get to the next related bill on the agenda for tomorrow, Councilmember Hitchin.
Thank you, Chair. For all three of these, the original, current, and amendment, it's the funding levels are based on a biennial budget as opposed to an annual budget, correct?
So the advice we've gotten from finance is that these are based on a per transaction. And so the transaction for the biennium or for on an annual basis. So for example, if we just use senior centers, for example, that would probably be 25,000 for the biennium, unless it were a contract for a single year. But they've looked at it as a transaction for the biennium. But it could be that that entity is doing a different service, which would be a separate transaction where that could be a second contract, but still subject to the 25,000 limit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Cruver.
Thank you, Chair. I think that was already answered, but my understanding is that we've been doing it wrong for the last 20 some years. That was the interpretation.
I think that's in dispute.
That's it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Murray?
So the next ordinance that's up for consideration is 2023-67, and this would create a notice of funding availability process that's similar to the current process used that you've heard called the request for proposal that exists on current law. The issue and problem has been that the recent legal analysis is that the council lacks the authority to re-rack or revise that list when it comes to you. And so what this would do is create a separate process, still meeting the charter's requirements that professional services be advertised and written, but it would allow the council some ability to revise the list. That is allowed both under state law and under the charter, but is not represented in current code. So the amendment that's being offered continues sort of the requirement. We will need to have a trailer bill to identify the funds and programs for which this new process applies to. It will require that this notice of funding availability be advertised and written proposals accepted. That meets your requirements under the charter. It will still require the department to rank with any applicable advisory group to score and rank those applications. And then those lists will come to the council for its review. And this is one change in the amendment, is that the information that will come to council includes the scoring, ranking, and recommendations separately of the applicable advisory group, the department before the executive's review, and then the list after the executive has reviewed it and what was forwarded to council. It allows the council to, three choices, either to accept all recommendations as offered, reject them, and require that a new notice of funding availability be issued, or the council can revise the recommendations. However, those revisions are limited to adding, not removing entities from the list, and that would be one entity per range of 10 eligible applications. And then it would allow the council to proportionally reduce the funding to those entities that are on the list up to 10% to generate new funding to provide to those any added entities. Then it makes it clearer that if there's any new appropriated funding that becomes available, and this sometimes happens because entity is found to be ineligible or they cannot contract for the services no longer, if there is appropriation authority, the department will either make new awards in a new list from current applications to be brought to the council, and that's only when the amount is under 100,000. If the amount is over 100,000, they would just advertise a new notice of funding availability, and likewise that list would come to council for action. It's made clearer within the ordinance that there is a written agreement that is to show the public benefit for those monies, and that agreement must contain the standard terms and conditions applicable to county agreements or contracts for similar services, that the funding must generally be distributed on a reimbursable basis, and then except for the contract limits that we just previously spoke about, that distributions from under the NOFA process must conform to any applicable state, federal, or local law. And that's primarily to ensure that the dedicated funding is used for the dedicated purpose that would probably reside in another part of code or state law.
Questions about the anticipated amendment to come forward by Councilmember Morel on the notice of funding availability bill? Councilmember Denson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a question about number 9. Aren't all of our grants reimbursable?
In general, that's correct, but there may be opportunities for which you could do in advance. And so we didn't want the law to actually prohibit that instance. But I would say 99% of the time, you are doing a reimbursable basis. But I know there's been some instances with ARPA funding where you have actually done a grant in advance of the purchase.
Have we ever done that outside of ARPA? Like, would that be an opportunity moving forward? Because I know that's an issue for some of our smaller nonprofits.
No, I mean, I think it really is, it's very selected and mostly with federal funding because they have the ability, you still have gift of public funds issues
Right.
that resides in our state constitution. And that's why we've always said reimbursable basis. So in those instances where we've been able to do grants, in large part, I'm not saying even just for the county, but it's state law, it's been on federal funding so that we avoid that issue. So, but whatever we put into our ordinance is what it could be 100%. And so we wanted, that's why I use the term generally, so that you don't preclude that opportunity if it were to arise.
Okay, yeah, I just didn't know if that was necessary to say, but maybe it is, just
You
in
never
case there
know.
are opportunities in the
right.
future. All right,
Mhm.
thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Real quick, as I understand it, we cannot remove anyone off the list under
Correct.
this recommendation.
Mhm.
And I would like us to give it some thought. I will use recent example, say the Pierce County Housing Authority ran into some legal issues a couple years back. And it would be really awkward if while they're on the front page of the paper because of a fiscal issue and a process that was started 9 months earlier is coming to fruition before us, and suddenly we're given $200,000 to an organization that is, under a legal investigation or something like that. And so I think we as the elected council members should be able to remove someone like that rather than be forced to fund it or forced to stop the whole process and restart it another 9 months later.
So I would just say that I believe that if that instance were to occur, the likelihood is that there has been materially false information provided in the process that would remove that entity at the executive level, not at the council level.
But it may break in the news from the time it's sent from the executive to us, because that sometimes can be a whole nother month that it sits between here and there. And literally if something broke on a Monday and it's on our Tuesday agenda, we are stuck in a process of either funding a discredited organization, fully funding it, or rejecting the entire thing. And I don't think that's a position that any of us up here want to be in.
No.
So I would just talk to the maker of the amendment and think about how a situation like that should be handled. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Morel will continue to think about that. I totally hear the thought, Vice Chair Campbell, and would also invite some further conversation from the executive about in this real world example where we have had this sort of thing play out from the time somebody gets from an allocation advisory committee to council, things do come to light. Is there a cure at the administrative level with the provisions here in code about the list that we are advancing? How could we cure that when something comes in real time? Vice Chair Campbell?
Yeah, as I read this, executive can kick anyone out for any reason they want. They don't need a reason. They can just say, I don't like the color of their logo, and boom, they're out. When it comes to us, I mean, I'm sure they have to show it, but
I think that's the difficult. I totally hear you. I think what the difficulty is, I know it's just an example and it's a good one, but like hearing something in the newspaper that the legislative branch doesn't necessarily have the time to ferret out, that we read in the newspaper and substantiate it, whether it's really truthful or not, have the evidence to found it or not. I think that's where just practically we get a little hung up. Totally hear the real world example, Vice Chair Campbell, and there's other examples. And is it the legislative branch's role to read a newspaper story and react in real time when we may or may not have the contract compliance experts and the expertise to substantiate something we're reading 24 hours before? That just thinking through those realities.
I mean, the department, as I understand it, does have, and this exists for the RFP processes, they have protest processes, and they also have review processes that happen both in the recommendation and the generating the list, but they also do their due diligence when they actually enter into the contract. And if there were new information, they would investigate it, and they have processes in place on the executive side to have that back and forth to know whether or not it's actually a substantial issue for risk of public funds. Because you could have the reverse, which you have obviously with State Streets, where you had information that then, has now come to be questioned. And so that's probably far more the risk is getting a person on the list than one taking it off, because whether it's within the RFP application requirements to show that they are financially secure, there's also those that risk in contract that if it were to come to be even after award, that they can actually stop funding. So there's, I think, more risk on the side of someone being off the list than being taken off later for a material issue of both, for financial risk.
Good question to think through. Thank you for raising it.
So the last ordinance that you have on your agenda for tomorrow is 2023-68, which creates the Community Needs Fund. And this fund would be used to provide monies to businesses, organizations, or public entities for community needs to improve the quality of life in Pierce County. What the amendment would do with this is no longer have this be a special revenue fund, but create it as a program. It still would have the same purposes and aims that existed in the original, but that the maximum amount that could be appropriated for the program was set at 3.5 million each biennium. Those grants may not exceed 75,000 in a fiscal year or 150,000 in a fiscal biennium. So in this sense, it is different from the general contract for services procurement laws. This also requires that the funding be distributed per an agreement that demonstrates a public benefit in exchange for the funds, and adds the same requirements that I previously stated with respect to those out of the notice of funding availability, that the agreement must contain standard terms and conditions applicable to similar agreements at the county. Funding must be generally distributed on a reimbursable basis, and then except for those service contract limits, the distributions must conform to all federal, state, or local laws.
Questions about this amendment to the Community Needs Fund program? Councilmember Denson.
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify, so the real difference is number 3, the setting the maximum amount.
Correct.
Okay.
I would say from the perspective of finance, creating it as a program versus a fund was something that was very important to them, to deal with what they felt were inallowable accounting issues. But as a program, you can use miscellaneous current expense or other funding so long as it comports with the requirements that the funds currently have in code. So for example, the Youth Prevention Violence Funds, you could use this program to distribute those funding, but it would still need to conform to the conditions of the actual revenue source. And in that instance, it's for youth violence prevention programs.
But it could come from youth violence prevention. It could come from general
ARPA, it
fund,
could come from,
But
right.
calling it a program and not another fund just
Correct.
makes that easier.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Not seeing any. Councilmember Morel.
Thank you. I really appreciate staff's work on this to try and get it to reflect, I think, what the council is attempting to do here. One, accountability, more transparency in the process. And there again, this is all predicated on the fact that we, as Councilmember Campbell said, we've been past practice have dramatically changed on this budget cycle. And so I think bringing it more in line, obviously we, as Chief of Staff said, we still need trailer bills on some of these. And it's a work in progress. So I am open to other members' input on this. But I think there again, if we're going to change kind of how we distribute funds during through a budget cycle, we need to follow a process. And this allows a process to be put in place and puts in guardrails to make sure that we are distributing those funds equitably amongst all the members. And so I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. And like I say, it's a work in progress. So we have until tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councilmember Hitchin.
Thank you, Chair. Are these processes for both the legislative and the executive branch of government? And I don't know if courts do any of that. Would it be all 3 branches are following these rules and the caps and all of that?
Every department, every independently elected executive, every department, every office, including the executive, the sheriff, the legislative branch, would have to comply with the rules we set in code.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Murray, did you want to? Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. Thank you, Ms. Murray, for the legislative history in chart form. I think it's logical and easy to follow in this manner. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Morel, for bringing ideas forward for council consideration, and it will be on tomorrow's council meeting agenda at 3 p.m. We don't have any other we don't have grant reports for authorization on tomorrow's meeting. It's 11:25. I think I'm going to recess us, and we're going to come back and do, well, let's have you get through committee agendas for the week, I think, Ms. Long.
All right, we can do this quickly. So at 11:30, of course, you have your special study session with the legislative delegation. At 1:30 today is the Select Committee on Homelessness. This will take place at the Tacoma Rescue Mission, and Duke Paulson will be making a presentation on their update. On Tuesday, tomorrow, beginning at 9:30, you have a special Economic and Infrastructure Development Committee meeting. There are a couple proposals for consideration. First is 2023-53, and this is the sewer rates and charges proposal. This has a November 14th final. Next is 2023-55. This is the Pierce County Airport's lease rates and rental fees proposal. This also has a November 14th final. Next, we have 2023-58. This is the ferry fares. Again, a November 14th final. 2023-61. This is accepting an additional $450,000 loan from the Washington State Department of Transportation Community Aviation Revitalization Board. This is for replacement of the then field hangar doors. This has a November 14th final. And then finally, you have 2023-69, which is establishing a small business security and safety program. This is with a focus on supporting crime-impacted unincorporated communities and small cities and towns. This has a November 21st final hearing date. At noon tomorrow is your regular study session. One item under Chair's topics is Allocation Advisory Committee Youth Violence Prevention Recommendations. And Heather Moss will be here for that. And under other business, you do have an executive session. And then just a reminder that following study session, you do have a closed session. At 3 p.m. is your regular council meeting. On Wednesday, November 1st, beginning at 9:30, you have a council retreat, budget retreat. The items on that agenda are the ARPA allocations and the capital improvement projects. On Thursday, November 2nd, beginning at 9:30, you have another budget retreat. Your discussion items are MCE and community funding requests, general reporting and monitoring, and carryover items not previously addressed. Friday, November 3rd, you do have a budget retreat scheduled, but I think the preference is not to have that so that staff is able to work on amendments. And those are your meetings for the remainder of this week.
Thank you. Ms. Murray, you are going to need time with us, right?
No.
You don't have anything scheduled. Is any member going to want time to do any other business or reflect on anything we've talked about? Or should we adjourn this?
The only thing I did want to do is introduce our new staff.
Sorry for the truncated time.
Sorry.
Ms. Murray, please go ahead.
William?
Got 2 minutes.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, today is the first day for Andrea Kelly. She comes to us by way of the Superior Court Clerk's Office. May she say a few words?
Good morning, Ms. Kelly.
Certainly. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited to be here. As William said, come by way of Superior Court. I have 18 years with the county, split between district and Superior Court. So excited to bring that experience here. Thank you for the opportunity.
We're very excited to have you here. Many of us have followed your career at Superior Court and are very impressed, and we're fortunate to have your expertise. So thank you. Welcome. Sorry for the truncated welcome, but we'll get to work closely with you. I'm gonna thank everyone for the council miracle of getting through this study session in 30 minutes. And I'm gonna adjourn the money study session.
All right.